People think the worst betrayal comes from strangers. They're wrong. The deepest wounds are almost always made by family. Mine happened on a sunny Saturday afternoon at my mother's 65th birthday lunch, surrounded by crystal glasses, expensive flowers, and relatives pretending to love each other. By the end of that meal, my sister thought she had destroyed me. Instead, she destroyed herself. But to understand why everyone at that table went completely silent, you first need to know one thing. Sometimes, the strongest person in the room is the one who says the least. My name is Emily Carter. I was 34 years old, and according to my family, I was the biggest disappointment they had ever produced. At least, that's what they liked telling everyone. I wasn't married. I didn't bring a boyfriend to family gatherings. I had no children, at least none that anyone knew about. Every holiday, every birthday, every Thanksgiving, every Christmas dinner turned into another opportunity for someone to remind me how much of a failure I supposedly was. Usually, it was my younger sister, Veronica. She was 31, loud, glamorous, and absolutely convinced the world revolved around her. She had been married twice. Both marriages ended in ugly divorces. She had no children, but somehow that never became the topic of family conversations. Instead, everyone focused on me. I was too independent, too focused on work. According to Veronica, I was also intimidating to men. She loved saying that one because it always made everyone laugh. Even Dad, especially Dad. Mom's birthday celebration was held at the Riverside Grand Hotel, one of the nicest places in the city. The private dining room overlooked the river. Fresh white roses decorated every table. A violinist played softly in the corner, while servers carried plates that probably cost more than my first car payment. Everything looked perfect. Just like my mother wanted. Appearances mattered more than reality in our family. Always had. I arrived exactly on time carrying a bouquet of white lilies and a small wrapped gift. Mom barely looked at either. "Oh, Emily made it." That was my greeting, not a hug, not a smile. Just mild surprise that I'd shown up. Veronica noticed me immediately. "There she is," she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. Our mysterious sister finally decided to join civilization. A few cousins. I smiled politely. "I wouldn't miss Mom's birthday, really." Veronica grinned. "I thought maybe you had another exciting Saturday night with your cat." More laughter. I didn't even own a cat. But facts never stopped Veronica. I took my seat without responding. Experience had taught me something important. Bullies hate silence. Dad arrived a few minutes later. He kissed Mom, shook hands with my uncles, then looked directly at me. "You still working those crazy hours?" "I enjoy my job," he snorted. "You know what your problem is? Here we go. You think a career can replace a family." The table became unusually quiet. Everyone knew what was coming. Dad loved giving speeches, especially when I was the target. "One day you'll wake up old and alone." He picked up his wine glass. "And then it'll be too late." Several relatives nodded like he'd just shared ancient wisdom. I simply sipped my water. No argument. No tears. Nothing that irritated him more than any response ever could. If someone had walked into that room, they probably would have believed my family cared about me. They asked polite questions. They smiled. They complimented my dress. But beneath every conversation was the same message. "You don't belong here." I had lived with that feeling since childhood. Veronica had been the favorite, always. When she forgot homework, teachers were unreasonable. When she failed a class, the teacher was unfair. When she crashed Dad's car at 19, it was because the roads were dangerous. When I graduated at the top of my college class, Dad said I should have chosen a more practical major. When I bought my first house without asking anyone for help, Mom wondered why I hadn't picked a neighborhood closer to Veronica. Nothing I ever accomplished belonged to me. It somehow always became about her. Eventually, I stopped trying. Not because I gave up, because I finally understood something. You can't earn love from people who already decided you don't deserve it. Lunch was served. For almost 20 minutes, everything remained surprisingly peaceful. People discussed vacations, sports, politics, the weather. I almost believed this gathering might be different. I should have known better. Veronica set down her fork dramatically. "So." She smiled at everyone before looking directly at me. "Emily turned 34 last month. Here we go. Aren't you worried?" I blinked. "Worried about what?" "Oh, come on." She laughed. "You know?" She leaned forward. "Being alone forever." Someone chuckled. Another person looked down at their plate. Veronica continued. "I mean, 34. She exaggerated the number like it was 84. "No boyfriend. No kids." She shrugged. "I guess some women just missed their chance." My aunt covered her mouth to hide a smile. Dad didn't hide his. He laughed openly. "You know what saddens me?" Veronica continued. "Mom always dreamed of grandchildren." She sighed dramatically. "But Emily." She looked at me with fake sympathy. "Is apparently married to her career." Mom shook her head. "I've stopped asking." Dad added quietly. "Honestly, she's such a waste." The words landed harder than I expected. Not because they surprised me, because he said them so casually. Like discussing tomorrow's weather. A waste, his own daughter. The room became very still. No one defended me. Not one person. Some avoided eye contact. Others pretended to focus on dessert menace. That was always how my family handled cruelty. Ignore it. Pretend it wasn't happening. I looked around the table. These were people I'd bought birthday gifts for, helped during illnesses, lent money to, driven to hospitals, attended wed and after funerals, yet none of them spoke. Silence protects the bully. I learned that years ago. Veronica wasn't finished. You know what's really sad? She folded her hands together. When Mom and Dad are gone. She paused dramatically. Emily won't have anyone. She smiled. No husband. No real family. Then she laughed. Maybe she'll adopt another houseplant. The table erupted. Even people who looked uncomfortable forced polite laughter, because that's what families like mine do. They laugh with the loudest person. I looked down at my watch. 8 minutes, exactly as expected. Veronica noticed. What? She smirked, checking how much longer you have to survive family time. I smiled. Actually smiled. For the first time all afternoon. No, I said calmly. I'm just making sure someone doesn't get lost. She frowned. What does that mean? It means? I glanced toward the dining room entrance. He should be here any second. Hey. Veronica laughed again. Oh, this is rich. She looked around the table. Does Emily have an imaginary boyfriend now? Even Dad smiled. About time? I hope he's real. More laughter. I simply folded my hands and waited. Because after years of humiliation, after years of letting everyone underestimate me, after years of protecting the people I loved, the truth was finally walking through those doors. And none of them, not my parents, not my sister, not a single relative at that table, were ready for what they were about to see. The room filled with laughter. Not kind laughter. The kind meant to remind someone exactly where they stood. Veronica leaned back in her chair, clearly pleased with herself. So, she said with a smug grin, where is this mystery man? Did he get stuck in traffic? Or is he another one of your little stories? A few cousins chuckled. Dad swirled his wine and shook his head. I've been saying it for years. Emily lives in her own world. Mom sighed dramatically. I just wish she would stop pretending everything is fine. I didn't answer. I simply looked at my watch one more time. 7 seconds. 6. 5. Then, the private dining room doors slowly opened. At first, no one paid much attention. People assumed it was another waiter. But it wasn't. The restaurant manager walked in first, wearing his finest suit. His expression was unusually serious. Behind him came 2 members of the hotel staff. They weren't carrying food. Instead, they were clearing a path. Veronica frowned. What is this? Before anyone could answer, a tall man stepped into the room. He looked calm, confident, elegant without trying. His charcoal gray suit fit perfectly. His posture was straight, and his eyes immediately found mine. The moment they did, his entire face softened into a warm smile. He walked directly toward me. Without saying a word, he leaned down and kissed my forehead. There you are, he said gently. I'm sorry I'm late. I had one last emergency surgery. The room went completely silent. I smiled up at him. I figured. He squeezed my hand. I wouldn't miss today. Then he looked around the table. His polite smile remained. Good afternoon, everyone. Nobody answered. Not immediately. Everyone seemed too busy trying to understand what they were seeing. Veronica blinked several times. Wait. She looked at me, then back at him. You, before I could speak. He answered. My name is Daniel Carter. He extended his hand politely. I'm Emily's husband. Silence. Complete silence. If someone had dropped a fork onto the marble floor, it would have sounded like thunder. Veronica laughed. Only this time, it sounded forced. No. She shook her head. This has to be a joke. Dad frowned. Husband. A mom looked directly at me. Emily, her voice barely worked. What is he talking about? I calmly reached into my purse. Inside was a simple leather wallet. I opened it, then slid a folded document across the table. Daniel sat quietly beside me. Dad unfolded the paper. His eyes moved slowly across the page. Marriage certificate. State of Massachusetts. Emily Carter. Daniel Carter. Married 5 years ago. Dad stopped breathing for a second. Mom grabbed the certificate from his hands. Her face lost all color. 5 years. She whispered. You've been married for 5 years. I nodded. Less! Veronica stared at me. No. She laughed again. You would have told us. I looked directly into her eyes. Would I? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Before anyone could recover, another voice called from the hallway. Daddy. Tiny footsteps echoed across the polished floor. Then 2 little children ran into the room. A little bull girl. Both around 4 years old. Both laughing. Both racing straight toward us. Daddy. They wrapped themselves around Daniel's legs. Then both looked at me. Mommy. I opened my arms. They crashed into me so hard I almost lost my balance. I laughed as they hugged my neck. I missed you. So did we? My daughter said. We made pictures for Grandma. My son proudly held up colorful drawings folded inside his tiny backpack. The entire room froze again. Nobody moved. Nobody even blinked. Then Daniel reached toward the doorway one last time. I've got her. He carefully lifted a baby carrier. Inside was our 8-month-old daughter. She was asleep, wrapped in a soft pink blanket. Daniel gently placed the carrier beside my chair. She finally fell asleep. I smiled. That's a miracle. He laughed quietly. It only took 40 minutes. Our son looked proudly at everyone. This is our baby sister. And no one answered him. They couldn't. Mom's fork slipped from her fingers. It hit the plate with a sharp clink. Her eyes filled with tears. You? She looked between me and... Those are... my grandchildren? I finished softly. She covered her mouth. Dad remained perfectly still. His face had turned pale. The same man who had called me a waste less than 10 minutes earlier now couldn't even look at me. Veronica stood so quickly her chair nearly fell over. This isn't funny. I looked at her. I never said it was. You made this up. Daniel calmly reached into his jacket. He handed Dad another document. Family photographs. Hospital birth records. School enrollment papers. Vacation pictures from 5 years of marriage. Christmas mornings. Birthdays, trips to the beach. Halloween costumes. Tiny first steps. First bicycles. Family vacations. A complete life. One that my parents had never even known existed. Dad stared at every photograph. There I was, smiling, laughing, holding newborn babies, standing beside Daniel at graduation ceremonies, celebrating anniversaries, looking happier than he had ever seen me, because he had never seen me happy. Not really. Not since I left home. Finally, Dad spoke. Why? His voice sounded small. Why didn't you tell us? I looked at him for several long seconds. Then I answered honestly. He frowned. What? I tried 6 years ago. Nobody spoke. You remember Thanksgiving. Mom slowly looked up. The year Daniel came to our apartment. Recognition slowly appeared on her face. I continued. You canceled dinner because Veronica wanted to fly to Las Vegas. Dad looked confused. You never met him. I turned toward Mom. Then Christmas. You spent the whole evening talking about Veronica's second engagement. I couldn't get a single sentence in. Mom lowered her eyes. I called when Daniel proposed. No one said anything. Dad told me left a message. I never got a call back. Dad swallowed hard. I don't remember. I do. I smiled sadly, because it mattered to me. Daniel quietly held my hand. He didn't interrupt. He had heard this story before. Many times. He knew every chapter. Every disappointment. Every birthday. Every forgotten phone call. Every broken promise. He had watched me cry after family dinners. He had watched me wonder why I was never enough. He had also watched me stop chasing people who never intended to catch me. Veronica crossed her arms. Oh, please. So you got married. So what? The room turned toward her. She kept talking. Why keep it a secret? I finally answered the question she should have asked years ago. Because every happy moment in my life somehow became about you. She frowned. What does that mean? It means. I looked around the table. I got tired of watching you compete with everything that made me happy. No one argued. Because everyone knew it was true, I continued. When I bought my first home, you announced you were shopping for a bigger one. When I earned my promotion, you suddenly claimed you were starting a company. When Daniel proposed, I paused. You announced your second engagement the very next day. Veronica looked away. I wasn't finished, so I made a decision. I stopped inviting people who only celebrated me when I failed. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything said all afternoon. And deep inside, I knew the hardest truths had only just begun. No one spoke. The room had become so quiet that I could hear the soft music from the hotel lobby drifting through the partially open doors. Only 15 minutes earlier, everyone had been laughing at me. Now every face around the table looked different. Some looked embarrassed. Some looked confused. A few couldn't even meet my eyes. Veronica was the only one still trying to hold on to her confidence. She crossed her arms and forced a smile. So, congratulations. Her voice sounded sweeter than before, but I knew that tone. It wasn't kindness. It was damage control. I still don't understand why you made such a big secret out of everything. I looked at her. I didn't. You just never cared enough to notice. Daniel gently picked up our sleeping baby, while our twins happily colored on the children's menace the restaurant had brought for them. Watching them made me smile. This was my real family. Not the people sitting across the table. The people beside me. The ones who loved without keeping score. Daniel quietly whispered, "Are you okay?" I nodded. I've been ready for this conversation for years. He squeezed my hand. You don't have to prove anything. I know. I smiled. I'm not doing this for them. I'm doing it for me. Dad cleared his throat. If you were happy. He hesitated. Why stay away from us? I looked at him for a long moment. Then I answered with complete honesty. I didn't stay away. You pushed me away. His eyebrows pulled together. I never. You did. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The difference is, I finally stopped chasing people who never looked back. I could see memories beginning to return to my parents, not because I reminded them, because the truth had been sitting quietly inside them all along. They had simply chosen not to see it. I remembered my college graduation. I had graduated first in my class. I was nervous, excited. I had reserved 3 seats. One for Mom, one for Dad, one for Veronica. Only one person showed up. My college advisor. He stood beside me in every graduation photo. My family's seats remained empty. That evening Mom called. We couldn't make it. Veronica had a nail appointment before her vacation. As if that explained everything. Then there was the day I bought my first house. I called Dad because I wanted him to see it. I finally did it. I told him. I bought my own home. His first question wasn't, "Are you happy?" It wasn't, "When can we visit?" Instead, he asked, "How much did it cost?" When I told him, he laughed. "You paid too much." That was the entire conversation. 3 minutes. I cried afterward. Not because of the house. Because I kept hoping things would change. The worst memory came 2 years later. I had just been promoted to director at my company. It was the biggest achievement of my career. I invited everyone to dinner. Nobody came. Veronica had decided to throw herself a new beginnings party after another divorce. Every single family member attended hers. Mine had 6 empty chairs. Daniel sat beside me that night. He reached across the table and took my hand. "You still have me." Back then, we weren't married yet. But in that moment, he became home. I looked around the birthday table. "You keep asking why I didn't tell you." I shook my head. "You should be asking why I stopped believing you'd care." Mom quietly wiped away tears. Dad stared at the tablecloth. Veronica rolled her eyes again. "Oh, please. There you go, making yourself the victim." I laughed, not loudly, just enough to surprise everyone. The victim. I looked directly at her. "Veronica, do you remember my wedding date?" She blinked. "No." "It was June 12th. She shrugged. "So, you scheduled your destination engagement party on June 12th. Her smile disappeared. "You told everyone I picked the date to steal your attention." I continued calmly. "The truth is, I chose my wedding date almost a year before. I even emailed the entire family. Nobody spoke. I still have the email." Dad slowly looked up. "You do?" I nodded. "I keep everything." Daniel reached into the leather folder he'd brought. He handed me a small envelope. I smiled. "Thank you." Inside were printed copies, emails, text messages, holiday inn invitations, baby shower invitations. Every single one had been sent. Every single one had gone unanswered. Or worse, rejected. I placed them neatly on the table, one after another, like pieces of a puzzle. Mom picked up one of the papers. It was an invitation to our twins' first birthday. Her hands began to shake. "I never saw this." I looked at her carefully. "I know?" She frowned. "I know you never saw it." Everyone looked at me. Then I turned toward Veronica. I know exactly where it went. Veronica's face changed instantly. Just for Dickon. But I caught it. So did Daniel. So did Dad. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "You always managed Mom's email." I answered quietly. "You said she didn't understand technology." Mom looked confused. "That's true." I nodded. "It was. So every invitation I ever sent." I paused. Went through Veronica first. The room became silent again. Dad slowly turned toward his younger daughter. "Veronica." She laughed nervously. "Oh my gosh. Now you're accusing me of hacking emails." I shook my head. "I don't need to accuse you." Daniel slid another folder across the table. This one was thicker. Much thicker. Dad opened it. Inside were printed email records, forwarding rules, deleted messages, timestamps, everything. I watched Dad's expression change page by page. He looked up slowly. His voice cracked. "These invitations were deleted." I nodded. "Before Mom ever saw them." Mom grabbed another page. There were dozens. Wedding invitations, pregnancy announcements, Christmas cards, photos of the twins, birth announcements, messages asking if they wanted to meet their grandchildren. Every one of them had disappeared. Mom stared at Veronica. "You told me Emily stopped talking to us." Veronica swallowed. You said she didn't care anymore. You said she wanted nothing to do with this family." Tears rolled down Mom's face. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God." Dad looked at Veronica. His voice was deeper than I'd heard in years. "Tell me she's lying." Veronica looked around the room. No one came to her rescue. Not one cousin, not one aunt, not one uncle. For the first time in her life, she stood completely alone. She opened her mouth, closed it, then whispered. Nobody interrupted. I thought. She looked down. "If Emily stayed close, Lyle, you'd stop needing me." The words landed like a stone in the center of the table. Everything suddenly made sense. Every lie, every missing invitation, every canceled visit, every misunderstanding, every family argument. It hadn't been an accident. It had been a plan. A plan that had lasted for years. And as I looked at my parents' faces, I realized they were finally beginning to understand the terrible price of believing one daughter without ever listening to the other. But the biggest truth, the one that would change everything, still hadn't been revealed. No one moved. No one even reached for the food anymore. My mother's birthday lunch had become something none of us expected. It wasn't a celebration. It was the day the truth finally caught up with us. I looked around the table one last time. For For years, I had imagined this moment. I had imagined shouting, crying, demanding answers. But now that it had finally arrived, I felt strangely peaceful, because I no longer needed their approval. I already had the life I had worked so hard to build. Veronica sat perfectly still. Her makeup was flawless. Her designer dress looked expensive. But for the first time in her life, she had no audience. No one rushed to defend her. No one laughed at her jokes. No one agreed with her excuses. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Dad slowly closed the folder of printed emails. He rubbed his forehead. How long? His voice sounded exhausted. How long has this been happening? I answered honestly. Almost 6 years. Mom gasped. 6 years. I nodded. Every Christmas. Every invitation. Every family faux-val. I sent them all. And every time I received silence. I paused before adding quietly, I eventually stopped believing you wanted me in your lives. A mom broke down crying. She covered her face with both hands. I thought you hated us. I thought you had chosen to leave. I shook my head gently. I was hurt. There's a difference. She looked at me through tears. Why didn't you come to the house? I did. Her eyebrows lifted. The first year after the twins were born. I drove there. I sat outside for almost 20 minutes. I watched everyone through the living room window. Dad frowned. You were there, Les. I saw Veronica's car. I saw all the family inside. I had the twins sleeping in the back seat. I smiled sadly. I realized no one had noticed I wasn't there. So I drove home. My words seemed to echo through the room. Even my uncles lowered their heads. One of my aunts quietly wiped away tears. Daniel never interrupted. He simply held our baby while our twins continued coloring, completely unaware that years of family pain were finally being uncovered. Watching them reminded me why I had stayed silent for so long. I had promised myself that my children would never grow up surrounded by constant criticism. They deserved peace. Not competition. Love. Not conditions. Dad finally stood. He walked slowly around the table. For a second, I wasn't sure what he intended to do. Then he stopped beside my chair. I owe you an apology. His voice shook. A real one. I looked up at him. In 34 years. I praised you less than I criticized you. I celebrated your failures more than your successes. I believed whatever I was told without asking for your side. He took a deep breath. When I called you a waste today. His eyes filled with tears. I became the father I promised I would never be. The room remained silent. I can't erase what I've done. I can't give you back birthdays. Or the years I lost with my grandchildren. But I am deeply sorry. For the first time in many years, I believed him. Not because the words erased the past. They couldn't. But because he finally stopped making excuses. He accepted responsibility. That mattered. I stood and hugged him. Only briefly. Not because I didn't care, but because healing takes time. Trust isn't rebuilt in one afternoon. Mom walked over next. She knelt in front of our twins. Her hands trembled. May I? She asked softly. I nodded. Our son looked at me first. I smiled. It's okay. He stepped forward. Mom wrapped her arms around both children and harder than anyone in the room. I've missed so much. She whispered. So much. My daughter looked confused. It's okay, Grandma. Those simple words broke whatever strength Mom still had. Across the room, Veronica suddenly pushed back her chair. So that's it? Everyone turned toward her. You all blame me. Her voice grew louder. What about Emily? She kept secrets too, I answered calmly. Yes. I protected my peace. There's a difference. She laughed bitterly. You think you're better than me now? No. I think I finally stopped competing with you. As she pointed toward Daniel. You think marrying some famous surgeon makes you special. Daniel smiled politely. It doesn't. He spoke for the first time in several minutes. My career has nothing to do with this. He looked directly at Veronica. I fell in love with Emily because she is kind. She listens. She forgives. And after everything I've witnessed today, I'm honestly amazed she continued hoping this family would one day love her the way she deserved. No one argued, because everyone knew he was right. Veronica looked around desperately. She searched every face at the table, looking for support, looking for someone to rescue her. Instead, she found disappointment. I think you should leave. She stared at him. What? You heard me? You've caused enough pain. Another aunt nodded. So have I. Then another cousin. I agree. One by one, the people who had spent years laughing beside her quietly stepped away. For the first time, she understood something I had learned long ago. Popularity built on cruelty never lasts. Without another word, Veronica picked up her purse. She looked at Mom, then Dad. Neither stopped her. She walked toward the dining room door. Just before leaving, she turned back. For a moment, I thought she might apologize. Instead, she simply asked, Are you really choosing her? Dad answered quietly. I'm choosing the truth. Veronica stood frozen for several seconds. Then she walked away. The doors closed behind her, and just like that, 6 years of lies walked out of the room. The restaurant staff quietly began clearing the untouched food. The manager approached us. "I'm terribly sorry your celebration was interrupted." Mom managed a small smile. "No," she looked around our table. "I think this is the first honest birthday I've had in years." Everyone laughed softly, not the cruel laughter from earlier, gentle laughter. The kind that heals instead of hurting. The rest of the afternoon felt completely different. Dad sat beside his grandchildren, helping them color pictures. Mom couldn't stop looking at the baby. Daniel told stories from the hospital, not about famous patients, but funny moments with children who made everyone smile. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible. I simply felt seen. Over the next several months, life slowly changed. Not perfectly. Healing never is. Dad called every Sunday. Sometimes we talked for an hour, sometimes only 10 minutes, but he always called. Mom visited often. She learned our twins' favorite bedtime stories. She celebrated our youngest daughter's first birthday. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. Trust returned one small moment at a time. As for Veronica, she stayed away for several months. Eventually, I received a handwritten letter. Not an excuse, not another attempt to blame someone else. An apology. She admitted she had spent most of her life believing love was something limited. If I received more, she believed she would receive less. Fear had turned into jealousy. Jealousy had become manipulation. Manipulation had destroyed our family. I didn't forgive her overnight. Real forgiveness doesn't happen that way. But I chose not to carry hatred. Hatred is another prison, and I had already spent too many years locked inside one. A year later, we gathered again for Mom's birthday. Same hotel, same private room. But everything felt different. There were crayons on the table. Children laughing. Family photos instead of awkward silence. Dad raised his glass. This year smiled at me. "I'd like to make the first toast." Everyone looked toward him. He cleared his throat. "To my daughter Emily. The strongest person in this family. The one who never stopped choosing kindness, even when we didn't deserve it." He looked at Daniel, and to the man wise enough to recognize her worth long before we did. Everyone raised their glasses. Even me. As I looked around the room, I realized something important. The greatest revenge isn't making the people who hurt you suffer. The greatest revenge is building a life so full of love, peace, and purpose that their cruelty can no longer define who you are. I spent years trying to earn a place at a table where I was never truly welcome. The day I stopped asking for permission to be loved was the day I finally found my family. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more.